Сайн байцгаана уу хүн үзэгчтэй. Өнөөдөр манай дефакто ярилцлагын зочноор Германы Tүүх социологийн ухааны доктор Райнер Zitelmann гэж хүн оролцож байна.
Райнер Цитэлман, Tүүх социологийн ухааны доктор, холбооны бүгд найрамдах Герман улсын дааш холбооны бүгд найрамдах Герман улсын дарамт шатын техникийн их сургуульд улс төрийн шинжилгээ ухааны мэргэжлэр суралцсан. 1986 онд Гитлерийн нийгмийн эдийн засгийн бодлого сэдвээр докторийн зэрэг хамгаалсан. Берлиний Фрай их сургуульд түүхчээр ажилласныхаа дараа өдөр тутмын Вэлт сонинд редакцийн дараагаар ажиллажээ. Чөлөөт эдийн засгийн талаар хамгийн олон ном бичсэн Капитализмын үзэл санааг олон улсад хүргэж яваа түүний бүтээлүүд дэлхийн олон оронд орчуулагдсны дотор Капитализмыг өмөөрхүү, Хүчирхэг капитализм, өөр байж зүрхэл, тэгээд баяж гэдэг 3 ном монгол хэл рүү орчуулагджээ.
Хам богдуул хатан туулгын хөвөөндөх цэнгэг агаартай бүсэд байрлалтай. Хүүхдэд ээлтэй хотхны төлөвлөлт болон эрүүл амьдралын хэм маягийг эрхэмлэгч та бүхнийг King Tower апартментийн 5 дугаар ээлжийн орон сууцнд урьж байна. Амар тайван амьдрал, аян давтагдшгүй өнгөтэй. Сэлгэр уужим орон зай, хараа баясгах үзэмжид харууц, сэвэр агаар, 5 тухтай орчин, тансаг, давтагдшгүй өнгө төрх. Таныг илэрхийлэх төгс хийцлэлтэй King Tower 5 дугаар ээлжийн орон сууцны загварын байранда та бүхнийг урьж байна. King Tower Apartment.
Good evening.
Hi.
Welcome to Mongolia.
Thank you for inviting me.
Your 3 books just published in Mongolia. Kапitalizmыг өмөөрөхгүй. Okay, about capitalism, about the mighty of capitalism, Хүчирхэг capitalism, and өөр байж зүрхэл, be different. So these are 3 books just recently published, translated and published, by the way, good translation. And the main topic is you are saying that out of every system, political, economic system that humankind made, capitalism is the best. That's what you are saying. So what is the main argument that gives you to say that? You have written 26 books, and just 3 of them are translated into Mongolian. So tell us about why you strongly believe that this is a better system.
Yes, my main argument is that 200 years ago, before capitalism, 90% of the worldwide population lived in extreme poverty, 90%. Today, it's less than 9%. And half of this reduction happened over the last decades. Even in 1981, 43% of the worldwide population lived in extreme poverty. And I think there was never any economic system that improved living conditions for ordinary people. And this is what Adam Smith predicted. Now in June, he has his 300th baptism day. And I read again his book about the wealth of nations from Adam Smith. And this is exactly what he predicted. Economic growth is the only possibility that nations can escape poverty. And the most important thing for economic growth is economic freedom. And I think 300 years later, after he was born, we can say he was right.
So economic freedom, all right. Freedom, that makes economic growth. And economic growth, that makes people living better.
Exactly.
So let's start from the economic freedom. What do you mean under that?
Economic freedom means that in the end, entrepreneurs or consumers decide what to produce, how to produce. The other concept in a planned economy is that politicians and government officials make the decision. And for me, capitalism means democracy in the economy, because we as consumers, we make every day the decision who will be successful, which entrepreneurs, and who not. If you order books or anything else on Amazon, you make Jeff Bezos richer. If you don't order, not. And so it's a consumer's choice. And the other concept is that politicians make the decision what to produce. And this means economic freedom for me.
All right. So you said interesting formula. Capitalism is a democracy plus economic growth, right? This economic freedom. Out of this equation, let's take a democracy. Why democracy is co-working together with this system?
No, my argument was more that that capitalism means democracy in the economy. But of course, there are also systems with a lot of capitalism that are no democracies. For example, China, for example, Vietnam. Let's explain me a little bit more in detail. There is no pure capitalism system nowhere in the world. And there is no pure socialist system nowhere in the world. All systems are mixed systems. Even in North Korea, you have a little bit private property and market. Not much, but you have some. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. And it was in other socialist countries. And in the so-called capitalist countries, as in the United States, you have a lot of socialism, a lot of state intervention. So it's mixed system.
It is not the issue of white or black. It is a mixture, kind of a gray in a way.
Not kind of gray. What I developed something in this book here, what I call the test tube theory. Maybe it's not a theory, more a metaphor. Imagine a test tube where you have two ingredients, market and state, or capitalism and socialism. And then you look what happens if you add more market and what happens if you add more state. I give you an example that is not so abstract. Venezuela was in 1970 one of the 20 richest countries in the world, Venezuela. Then they started with adding more state. Regulation, especially labor market regulation. Situation became worse. And then even in 1998, they voted for Hugo Chavez. He promised socialism in 21st century. Of course, the situation became worse. So they had then 100% inflation rate, 10% fled from the population from Venezuela. And you see, what happened there, situation became worse. The other example, China. In China, from 1958 to 1962, there was the so-called Great Leap Forward. This was the biggest socialist experiment in history. 45 million people died as a result of this experiment. And even in 1981, 88% of people in China lived in extreme poverty, 88%. Today, it's less than 1%. Why? Because Deng Xiaoping started in the 80s with his economic reform, introducing private property and pro-market reforms. What happened? People escaped poverty in China. The same Vietnam. Vietnam, a lot of people don't know, in 1990 was the poorest country in the world, poorer than all African countries. First, they had this terrible war. Then, after this, they had this terrible planned economy.
Exactly from that perspective, in Mongolia, people say that we have started that, we have stopped planned economy, we start market economy, we stop at the one political party system. So in short, we started this parallel, at the same time, transition. China didn't do the political one. So what is your take? Now many Mongols say maybe we could do it much like China, or...
No, I don't think that it is the secret of China that they have this political system with no democracy. Look at Taiwan, for example. Even they are a democracy and they are much more successful than China is. Or look at Singapore, for example, what is also a democracy. And it is. I have a friend in China at Beijing University. Even he added one chapter to my book. His name is Wang Chang. And he explained me a lot to understand what happened in China. And what he repeated time and again, our success was not because of the state, but in spite of the state. We came from almost 100% state, and then we reduced state. More market, more private companies. But of course, if you come from 100%, it's even today a lot of state in China, but this is not the reason for the success. And the problem is that people in the West, they don't understand. They think China is a special third way, a special China model. And even today in China, they start to believe this. and they go back now in the direction of more state and less market. And so what I want to say, we spoke about capitalism, socialism. There is no pure capitalism in the world. There's always this mixed system. And in my theory, it's much important, not the absolute relationship between both, but how it develops. If you want to understand a country, how it develops.
The West was expecting, with the growing private sector and with growing middle class wealth in China, they will demand more political reform. When that equilibrium is coming?
I don't know. This is, for example, I read what Milton Friedman wrote about China. This is, for example, exactly what he expected. He expected that something will happen as it happened in Chile. Chile, they started, I have also a chapter in my book there about Chile. Chile, they started with a dictatorship with Pinochet. But it was a terrible dictatorship on the one hand. On the other hand, in the economics, it was not so bad. They had introduced free market economy. And then as a result, people asked for more political freedom. And he expected that the same would happen in China. But it didn't happen. And I don't know whether it will happen. I think there is not... in most cases in history, democracy and market economy were together. But I think... it's also possible, maybe, that there's, for a time, a coexistence between a not democratic system on the one hand and a market economy on the other hand.
So democracy in a political system or freedom of speech or democracy in the economic system are two different things, right?
Yes, it's absolutely two different. You see it. As an example, we spoke about Vietnam before. In the economic sense, there is a lot of entrepreneurial spirit and much more freedom market. But in politics, we have one-party system. You don't have freedom of...
And yet Vietnamese now living much better than 20 years ago.
Absolutely. It's amazing what... and Vietnam is, for me, one of the best examples how capitalism can change a country. This is only because of capitalism.
Another question in your book, Strong Capitalism, or Mighty Capitalism. There is a chapter you said, in Africa, the capitalism is way better functioning or will bring more result than ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. Why you think so?
Absolutely. If you compare Africa on the one hand and Asia on the other hand, you see, African countries became much, much more development aid in the last 60 years, much more than Asian
colonial system
countries. But did it help? They are still so poor. I think development aid was a total failure. It's a wrong concept. Most of it goes to corrupt dictators, government, and in Asia, on the other hand, take this example, South Korea in the 60s. North and South Korea was one of the poorest countries, as poor as African countries. Then in the North, they established this planned economy. They are still poor. In the South, they established capitalism. And now it's one of the leading. So it's great. And this happened in Singapore. This happened in Hong Kong. This happened in Vietnam. This happened in China. So I think the Asian way is the successful way to introduce market economy. The way in Africa with development aid didn't work.
Does it mean that the ODA was giving a chance less for market economic ideas penetration?
Yes, in a way. The best way what development aid can bring is nothing. This is the best. But sometimes even the effect is the opposite of what is intended. So I would suggest stop it totally. I don't mean to help people if there's for example, natural disaster or something. Of course, we should help people in this situation, even if you can do much more. But this is what you call development aid, the illusion that with money that you can help them to develop.
Okay, let's talk about
it didn't work.
You bluntly stated that intelligent people why they don't like capitalism. Why?
A lot of people say this is the best chapter of my book. The first review that I read was from Madsen Piri from Adam Smith Institute, and I was very proud because he knew Hayek and Maggie Thatcher and so on. He wrote, Zitelmann did more than Hayek did about this topic. I was very proud about this review. So this is a chapter. It's not easy to sum up, but let's try a little bit. I come also from a family with an academic background, intellectual. And if you grow up in such a family, the main question is how many books have you read? And how is he at university and his degrees, like with me, my 2 PhDs, and I have maybe 7,000 books at home, I didn't count it. And then these people think the people who read more books should be in the highest position of the society. This is what they learn at home, and later they learn it at university. But then they have another experience. Their school neighbor who was very bad at school and not well read, maybe he has 5 McDonald's franchise today or a small company, and he has the bigger house, the bigger car, and the worst thing, he has the prettier wife. And then these intellectuals think something is wrong with the market economy because if everything would be okay with the market economy, I should have the bigger house and especially the prettier wife because I read so much more books than he. And what they don't understand, that, there are 2 ways how you can learn in learning psychology. I wrote my second doctoral dissertation about personality traits of super rich people, and what I learned, most of them were entrepreneurs. There are 2 ways how you can learn. The one way you call explicit learning. It's like academic learning, reading books, going to university. Mm-hmm. Then there's another way, implicit learning. It's like the school of life, learning by doing. And this explicit learning leads to explicit knowledge, book knowledge. This implicit learning leads to implicit knowledge. You can call it easier, intuition or gut feeling. And for entrepreneurs, this gut feeling is much more important than academic knowledge. And this is what the intellectuals don't understand. They know only this one way, this explicit learning, academic learning. They don't understand that there are a lot of other ways how we can learn a lot in life.
That's why being academic, intelligent background and family, you have been also doing all your own business, which you have sold after certain years, which is PR business, right? Yes. Yeah. So it's a combination of intelligence with the entrepreneurship will make better life. That's basically...
Of course, it's very rare. On the one hand, you have this... I know both of the worlds. On the one hand, you have the scholars, intellectuals, and academic world. On the other hand, you have these entrepreneurs. And I'm a combination. I've done both. And so maybe this is my advantage that I know both of these worlds.
Okay, let's say capitalism is... Capitalism, as you said, you very eloquently presented. But however, there is also opinion which says that capitalism creates monopoly.
Yes.
Does it?
And it is absolutely correct. Capitalism can lead to monopolies, but much more important, capitalism destroys monopolies. I will give you also an example. When the monopolies are on the top of their power, they seem so powerful, people think they will last forever, as Amazon today maybe, or Google. People can't imagine that one day they get. But I give you some example. I have it here in my book. 2007, there was a headline in Guardian, which is an important media in the UK newspaper. Will MySpace ever lose its monopoly? It was in 2007. If I ask today young people in my lectures, MySpace, they don't know what it is. I have to tell you, this is something as Facebook. Also, I haven't heard about it. This time, will MySpace ever lose its monopoly? The same year in Forbes magazine, the cover story was, will Nokia, Nokia, who will ever catch the cell phone king? Who uses a Nokia phone today? Or Xerox, in the United States, sometimes if you make a photocopy, even today, you speak about Xerox. Yes. Because Xerox had 95% market share in the 70s. Today, they have less than 2%, or Kodak.
So by nature, there is a not too big to fail, right?
No, and it was not because of government regulation or anti-monopoly politics, but it was because of innovation and competition. So yes,
which is possible only when the price is free.
Yes, and the only monopoly that is really dangerous is the state monopoly. And so for this reason, I can't understand anti-capitalists. In one moment, you discuss with them, and this monopoly is there, so bad. Half hour later, they say, we should nationalize some big banks, for example. Hey, but this is a monopoly, what you're suggesting. You can't be, on the one hand, against monopolies, and next time you're for nationalization. What is the worst monopoly?
Tell us about the price, please. So, for example, in Mongolia, they restrict the price for energy, which is the most important source of other wealth, and they keep especially very low, citing that the poor people cannot afford it. So let's keep it. And as a result, the rich people are paying also as a poor guys. As a result, the industry is almost collapsed. There's no capacity to increase their general might.
The same happened in Argentina. I was last year in Argentina. They do the same crazy things, and they are in very bad shape, their economy there in Argentina. Now, let's say something about price control or in general. Even Adam Smith wrote it in his book that this does not work. Of course, for people who don't understand anything about economy, it sounds logical. High prices, forbid it. It would be the same, it's raining all the time. I don't like the rain. Let's make a law to stop rain. If it would be possible to make a law to stop rain, maybe they would make a law to stop rain. But you know what will happen? It will have a lot of negative side effects. So, since there is inflation, there were always everywhere price control and stops. In Turkey in the last years, they had one stop after there, but did it help? Nothing. It never helped.
Big inflation now.
You have learned something from history. You can't stop inflation with a law with price control. It never happened. It has always.
How one can stop the inflation?
Yeah, the problem with inflation is, I think, the crazy policy of the central banks. We have inflation today everywhere in the world. We have it in the United States. We have it in Germany, and I think it's logical. If the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank and all the central banks started printing money, you can't do it without having inflation sooner or later.
Then now mostly including our central bank, they use the mechanism called the policy rate, and they keep increasing the policy rate when they see inflation. Does it work?
Yes, but they are in a trap. Of course, they have to do it because this is the only way to fight inflation. But they are in a trap. Now they increase the interest rates, but what happens now, there are a lot of problems with, for example, commercial real estate in the United States. I lost also money because of this, and you will see it. So they are in a trap. There is no solution for this problem.
What is the mechanism that is in the U.S.? When the policy rate increase, people would prefer not to invest into the real estate, or how does it
No, it's not that because if they have to prolong, they have debt, and then maybe they have to make a new contract, and they made it maybe with only 1 or 2%, and then they have pay 5 or 6%, then you can't calculate it. And this is always the mechanism. If you increase interest rates, in the real estate market, it's a devaluation of the asset prices, and this is what happens there.
Devaluation means that people who has a debt, because this higher pressure of interest rate, they need to sell it with cheaper price, which creates the devaluation of the property. You
have there a devaluation because people are not willing to invest then with the same, conditions as they did before. So it's a little bit complicated to explain it here, but it happens always. It's a mechanism. If you raise interest rates, you will have lowering and asset prices in real estate. This is already not only in real estate. You have also the problem if you raise interest rates too high on the stock market. You see it. If they would raise interest rates the way they should do, maybe 8% or 9%, you would have total collapse with the equity prices.
speaking about the equity prices, now in Mongolia they do it so-called the discounted mortgage loan. And they give to people, after 30% of the value prepaid, they give 3% interest rate mortgage loan, but actually in life the rate of interest rate is about 12-15%. Then the difference is paid by the state, by the specialized mortgage company. Does it work forever?
No, all this, I don't believe in all this kind of regulation. You know, we had this, not the same, but we had also this regulation.
In Germany?
No, in the United States. Before, you know, in 2008, there was this financial crisis, and before you had this house pricing bubble, and the state, for example, they forced at this time financial institutions to give people who have not so much money interest mortgages, people who could never pay back. And you know what the result? The result was the financial crisis, yes, the house pricing bubble. And this is always, in short term, it seems to be positive, but in the long term, it has negative effects. To make it's a complicated thing, but to make it a little bit easier, my opinion is, if politicians think that they are smarter than the market, it's not true. Politicians are never smarter as the market. They think so, but it's not true.
All right. So we have been kind of having an interesting journey throughout, all the way from Adam Smith all the way now, throughout the capitalist system. And these books you have written, and now you have been visiting many countries, and those books are translated into how many languages?
This book is translated now in 30 languages.
30.
30, yes. And the other one, I think it's now 12, and this is in 14 languages
14
now
languages.
Translated.
What makes you motivate to get these books translated into even in Mongolian, where only 3.5 million people? Why are you doing that?
First of all, for me, the so-called small countries are as important as the big countries. And because I'm a kind of non-conformist who does things different as other people do. This was the reason why I was successful with investments. I like something to do things different. And if all people ignore the small countries, now Mongolia, 3 people, not important for me, or Albania, 2 million people, not important. And I say, for me, they are important. I come here for a week. I will learn something, and I think it pays out for me, because the others don't do it. It's always to do things different than the other ones. A friend of me told me, so many languages, English, Spanish, and so it's enough. What will you do with the small countries? Yes, this is the way like most people think, but I'm not. And I was always successful to do things different than other people. And the other thing, I'm curious about other countries. I was curious to come here to learn something about Mongolia.
That approach is reflected in your book. Do it differently.
Yes.
And be rich. That's the
yes.
book. And inside I have very, very interesting, encouraging ideas to be different and to make a wealth. And these are the great books. Thank you very much for coming to Mongolia, in spite of the small country, as you said. And I think Mongolians, in particular the younger generation, will really appreciate the concepts you have reflected in this book. I would like to thank you.
I hope so, and I want to thank you. For me, it's very important. I hope the next book will also be translated in Mongolia, and then I promise I'm very happy to come back to Mongolia. I'm very happy to come back to your show.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
За хүн төлөвчтэй өнөөдөр манай дефакто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор ноён Райнер Zitelmann оролцлоо. Энэ хүний 3 ном нь монгол хэлээр гарсан байгаа. Гол санаа нь ямар нөхцөлд энэ улс орон хурдан хөгждөг вэ гэдгийг л ярьж байгаа юм. Уншаарай, хараарай. Баярлалаа.